Well, welcome in, everyone, to another edition of After Further Review. I'm Jay Smith, and alongside Bradley Kendall. First week After Further Review.
Sundays are for college football, not the NFL. Man.
Who knew? And
who would have thought? And even Monday nights, too, after last night's game.
Couldn't be more right after what an amazing weekend of football. Yeah.
We were so dead about it on Saturday night, and then come Sunday and Monday, we were completely turned around with our opinions on it.
Well, let's go ahead and jump into some of the notable games from Week 1. Obviously, the headlining game that really did not live up to the hype, Alabama FSU. We know Francois, obviously, with a season-ending injury. We'll talk about FSU's chances or lack of chances in a little bit. But what do you make of Alabama's performance in this game? I mean, did they look like the same team from last year? Did they look more polished? I don't feel like, watching the game, I felt like Alabama shined, and they were pretty impressive all around.
I'm going to go the complete opposite of that. I think Alabama played a lesser game than they really wanted to. And the final score is not going to say that. You know, in the box score, it's probably not going to look like that. But Jalen Hurts, honestly, throughout the entire game, only had 96 passing yards. Really not that impressive. I mean, the defense was defensive. How much they lost, the injuries they were suffering. They were the typical Alabama defense. The offense is definitely going to need some work. The running backs were definitely what everyone thought they were going to be. But yeah, I mean, aside the fact that Florida State really disappointed, I think Alabama really could have done a lot better than they did, which is saying something.
I think that's fair to point out, but I mean, also you have to look at the fact that FSU had 3 turnovers, Bama had none. I mean, obviously you could say that the Crimson Tide defense forced those. You could say that Florida State gave the ball up, but looking at the total yards, they were essentially identical. So, and I know that we discussed this kind of while we were watching the game. If FSU had not turned the ball over and given Alabama such a prime spot on the field, then it could have been a totally different game, or it could have been a much more interesting game.
Florida State had a lot of possessions they really should have scored in. I mean, it was kind of a back-and-forth affair. They really didn't finish off a lot of their drives. They had a lot going for them. Protect them. I think that's what kind of held them back. From the beginning, this looked a lot like the Washington game, and lo and behold, the final score was 24-7.
I got to say, I am pretty surprised. I picked FSU on the countdown show because I really thought they had a good chance with Francois. Obviously, with him being out now for the rest of the season, as sad as that is to see, it changes the whole landscape, and it's going to be the ACC. I feel like has already eliminated at least
one of their playoff contenders. Yeah. I think people were asking a lot out of Florida State coming off a year where it was kind of a down year for them. They get Francois back for another year under his belt, and it just didn't happen like that. And that's why the preseason rankings, you really just don't know. 3 was a little high.
Moving on, looking at Michigan, Florida. Michigan wins 13-17 over the Gators. I felt like it was a pretty impressive performance for the Wolverines. Your thoughts?
I mean, I expected Wilton Speight to do a little better. He did have a couple picks in there. They did switch to John O'Corn middle of the game, but overall in Michigan, what a game plan. Yeah. Florida obviously held back by their 10 suspensions they had in the quarterback situation. If they remind me of all. Was the better team. That's all I really
They were leading at the half. They were leading at the half, and they had. I'm looking here.
17-13 game at the half.
But 2 touchdowns in the second quarter, and both were pick sixes.
Wow.
So that, in and of itself, is important to note because they only scored 17 points. 14 of those were off of the defense. So, yes, a lot of questions offensively for the Gators, but I'm kind of with you on that boat for Michigan. I feel like it was a really impressive performance all around.
And Jim McElwain's a heck of a coach. I mean, you knew the defensive game plan for them was going to be great, but Michigan was just better. I mean, the fact that, I really wanted to see Florida really rise to the occasion and on a big stage challenge Michigan and do a lot better to be that second-best team in the SEC. They really just weren't, and they have a lot of questions going forward.
And that kind of, opens up the question again about the SEC East and how who the front runner. Arguable that it wasn't their best. It's still, they're not in midseason form yet. But
by any means,
who from the East can really contend with Alabama? And after seeing this game, I don't know. I
mean, maybe Georgia, but other than that, I mean, we saw Tennessee, ended up winning last night. But other than that, I don't think Florida's got any chance at all. Yeah. It's going to be kind of a rebuilding almost kind of year and just looking towards next year basically for them.
Looking at a more interesting game, we had Virginia Tech and West Virginia. This one was it was fairly back and forth. Ended up being 31-24 in favor of the Hokies, but still a very great. I mean, it was a back and forth game, and I felt like that either team, especially with Will Grier and how he was just absolutely annihilating the Virginia Tech defense, either team could have won this game. Either team should have won this game, but at the end of the day, the Hokies got it done.
And I was really looking away from this game at all for either team. I mean, West Virginia put up a heck of a fight. Virginia Tech, I was really surprised by Josh Jackson's play at quarterback. He looked even better than Gerard Evans would have been if he came back. But I was extremely impressive. I mean, West Virginia, I think they should have won the game. I really do. They had a couple
fair.
mishaps towards the end of the game. I think
That's
Will
fair.
Greer tried to do a little bit too much, tried to be that guy and try to like rebuild his career at West Virginia. But hey, I mean, it's only first week. You know, I think both teams are going to come away with this game pretty happy.
Yeah. Looking at another game, we had one that was really a thriller that shouldn't have happened because Tennessee takes down Georgia Tech 42-41 in double overtime. This game shouldn't have even gone to overtime.
And you saw on the sidelines they had that trash can that Tennessee was using for their defense. It basically represented their defense for the entire game. I mean, people were making jokes on Twitter, oh, Tennessee will win the championship of life for this game, but probably won't win this game as their own. But
shouldn't win the game.
I mean, in a losing, probably the best single performance I've ever seen in a losing take.
I think it was Georgia Tech had something like almost 600 total yards.
Had
I mean,
535 rushing yards, which I believe
Yes.
they were like in the last like 15 years, there were like 50 teams that had rushed for 500 yards, and only 3 of them had lost, and Georgia Tech's now one
the
of them.
amazing part of this really to me, I mean, they had 655 total yards, but the amazing part of this to me is Tennessee had 18 minutes of possession.
Wow.
Georgia Tech possessed the ball for over 41 minutes, and this game still made it into overtime.
They had probably 2 possessions that went over 18 minutes combined. I mean, Georgia Tech just milked the clock, and it was amazing that the score was as high as it was for how much time that just kept ticking off the clock from Georgia Tech's offense.
Well, we're going to move on, look at another game. Why I think this is
Largest,
what is
if I'm
the
not mistaken.
largest?
Maybe second largest.
UCLA, Texas A&M 45-41. Is this more A&M losing the game or UCLA winning the game?
Absolutely A&M losing it, but only to a degree because they did lose their quarterback, Nick Starkel, out for the year with a broken ankle.
Yeah.
Really tough to see because he really, I mean, it was generating a really good offense for A&M. Very surprising. 44-10. You know, they probably just got complacent. UCLA had a couple breaks. The ball went right through that defender's hands, and they ended up scoring to get within 2 scores. But Josh Rosen, I mean, silenced all the doubters that he had coming into the season. 491 passing yards and 4 touchdowns, no picks. I mean, pretty much saved Jim Moore's job, I would say, at UCLA.
Amazing thing is UCLA had 3 turnovers, A&M had none, and they were still able to overcome a 34-point questions now defensively. I don't know if he'll last the season.
And you want to talk about zero confidence going into next week. A&M's backup quarterback, Kellen Mond, was 3 for 17 in a relief effort for Starkel. So they're going to need some work. Maybe look to the third string if I were Kevin Sumlin because he may not have much time left.
Yeah, may not. Finally, we're going to look at Clemson-Kent State. Not a whole lot to talk about for this game. It was pretty straightforward. Clemson wins 56-3. Impressive performance by the defense, almost getting the shutout, giving up that 1 field goal. But overall, I was impressed with Kelly Bryant. He looked very nimble, very comfortable, very poised.
Very excited
confident,
with him, yeah.
And there wasn't a whole lot, coming from this game that I felt like the Tigers really needed to improve upon.
I didn't even know this going into it, but Kent State's quarterback, Nick Hawley, was not even a quarterback last year.
Wow.
Probably the reason they only had 1 passing yard the entire game. He was a converted wide receiver. But, I mean, not enough can be said about Clemson's run defense. I mean, it was just stout. It's what everyone expected it to be.
Yeah.
And that's great going into the next week with Auburn, who's a convincing running offense. That's what they like to do.
I mean, with the best front four in the nation. Transition now into our next segment, which we're going to call Surprise. So we're going to look at surprise struggles from this past weekend, specifically 3 different teams. We're starting off with USC. They were able to beat Western Michigan 49-31, but it was still a bit shaky, and it was a second-half kind of game.
And I'm sure when they scheduled this game a couple years ago, they didn't anticipate getting a Western Michigan team that made a New Year's Six Bowl the year before. They didn't have P.J. Fleck as their coach, doing all the magical things he was doing last year. Mm-hmm. But, I mean, still, you got a lot of questions for USC, especially going into a week where they play a tough Stanford team in the Pac-12. Sam Darnold, not his usual self, I guess you could say, kind of a small sample size because he only played for 9 games. But no touchdowns, 2 picks, really struggled. They were down, I believe, in the third quarter. I guess it is a California and USC.
Well, offensively, they touchdowns. I did see this statistic, though. He spread the ball to 10 different guys.
Wow.
So 10 different receivers got catches. So that's impressive. But all their scores were on the ground. So something that he needs to work on, in practice this week. But it was really more of a lack of defense on USC's part because their offense was able to score 49 points. That is a decent performance. But to give up 31 to Western Michigan made me raise some questions.
That's tough. And they lost a lot, I believe, on defense from last year. So it was kind of already a rebuilding project on its own. I think one thing to take away from this, though, Sam Darnold had a bad week. They still were able able to win by 18, and the rushing offense was fantastic.
Yeah.
So it's going to be a tough job for Stanford to stop them next week, but it should be a really interesting game. We'll talk more about that later.
Next team, the Buckeyes, Ohio State. They finished with 600 total yards in their win against. Another thing that was notable was Urban Meyer now 16-0 in season openers.
Wow. I mean, Indiana, tough test on the road, kind of a stingy defense.
Thursday night game.
Everyone's watching. Still getting over that 31-0 shutout from the playoff year before.
Yeah.
Kind of the same story as USC. Slow start, tried to get the wheels turning, and it took a little bit, but they eventually, I think Indiana just kind of buckled. They weren't exactly up to the challenge for 4 quarters.
Yeah, couldn't hang with them for 60 minutes.
But again, going into a week, they got to play Oklahoma. Oklahoma can keep up with them for 4 quarters, so they're going to have to turn it around pretty quickly going into the next week. Yeah.
Final team that we're going to look at, Louisville Cardinals. Now, they were able to get away with a win against Purdue. I believe by a touchdown. It was 35-28 was the score. But they had 2 fumbles on the goal line, a lot of penalties. They had 5 false starts in the first 16 minutes of the game.
And that you'd say that's easily correctable? But
fundamentals. It comes fumbling on the goal line. That's just fundamental. You got to hold on to the ball. False start penalties. That just goes back to basics. For me, next weekend.
And there's a lot of pieces that need to surround Lamar Jackson. He was himself. I mean, nothing to take away from him at all. He had 485 yards, I believe, and was his typical self from last year. But yeah, you're right. Like a lot of the remaining pieces that need to be put together, really up in the air right now for Louisville. Yeah. And in a league now where they could really make some damage with Florida State out. So they're really
it really magnifies the game next weekend between Clemson and Louisville, and they have a lot that they need to clean up before that game next weekend. But now we're going to get into some surprising performances from this past weekend. One of these, Taquan Marshall, the quarterback from Georgia Tech.
I mean, we've already touched on it, but you might as well bring it up again.
Yeah,
it was that impressive.
Just amazing amount of rushing yards this young man had against that
Tennessee defense.
Tennessee defense.
I mean, 249 yards, 5 touchdowns. Did it all himself. They really amazing. He might be the new Lamar Jackson. You never know.
Could be. What do you make of Josh Allen's performance? The Wyoming quarterback not doing as well. I mean, they lost their game.
Played Iowa and they lost 24-3. So he's kind of like Lamar Jackson in that he's really all that people talk about when it comes to Wyoming football. 2 picks, no touchdowns. They only scored 3 points. I believe they had a lot of turnovers, so that really impacted it altogether. Yeah. Iowa's a pretty tough team to play against, especially on the road. Their defense has usually been pretty stout over the years, but. Yeah, I mean, if he's going to be the number 1 pick like everyone's saying he is, then he's got a lot to work on.
And finally, Sam Darnold from USC. Again, we kind of touched on him a little bit earlier. We talked about the Trojans. He didn't throw any touchdowns. He did spread the ball out to a lot of guys. But like we kind of talked about, it is week 1. Still chicken off the rust from these. So
it's the performances they're going to draw people's attention are going to be the ones in the spotlight. Stanford in particular next week. So I think it's you can rub off this week. Not really worried about it too much, but if this happens, if this is a recurring thing,
could be a problem.
Wonder. Yeah.
Now we're going to transition into talking about some conference play. Look at some shakeups that happened across the board. One question I want to pose is about the ACC. Is it now? I mean, after watching this opening weekend slate of games, is it really the best or the deepest conference like we thought that it was last week? I mean, they had some close games against non-conference opponents. They had some losses that should have been wins. And now with Francois out in Florida State possibly off the board, what do you make of the ACC?
Beginning of the year, I said they were the best conference. I think 1 week was what did it for them. I really think we've completely college football. I'd even pose it's the Big Ten. I mean, look at the current state of what each team is right now. Do you really think that a Louisville or a Florida State, even a Clemson, would compare to State, Ohio State, and Michigan? I mean, if you look at the polls speak for themselves. Yeah. Big Ten's got 3 teams, or if not, I think 4 in the top 10 alone.
Yeah, I'm really high on. I mean, Michigan I like. Even though they're very young, I realize that, but I do like Michigan. Penn State, I'm really high on. Ohio State, even though they haven't played so great these last few games, still a great team. But you might be right. The Big Ten might be the best conference right now because looking at teams across the board in the ACC, if Clemson maintains the level of consistency, the level of play that they did from previous years, and assuming Louisville can clean it up, those are the only 2 schools that could contend
Maybe
with
Miami,
any other
Virginia
schools.
Tech,
and
but
you could make the argument that Clemson could because we just haven't seen Louisville be able to produce in those postseason games.
And even look at the bottom. I mean, Minnesota's got P.J. Fleck. They're developing. Michigan State used to be a couple years. Even Purdue, low teams in the standings. I mean, ACC right now, I think top to bottom, if you just look at the current state, I hate to say it, but they're on the outside looking in terms of best conference.
Yeah.
So still better than they were a few years ago, but
Do you think it's more of a depth issue or inconsistency?
I would say inconsistency. This is the 1 week they really had to prove all the doubters wrong. They were playing the SEC. They went 0-3 against the SEC.
That was a big one.
Yeah, and especially losing the close games. They really should have.
NC State, Georgia Tech. Who else?
UNC lost to California. That wasn't an SEC team, but lost
yeah.
last minute. So, yeah, I mean, it's only week 1, but I guess if you really got to look at not only the top, but the lower teams, Big Ten just, I think, blows them away right now.
All right, well, now we'll transition into another segment, one we did last season. Bring it back. So I have the trust flag out here. I'm going to read off a question. You can give your opinion, and if I disagree, I will throw the flag.
Which you usually do.
Usually, let's go ahead and jump right into it. So first question is, Francois' injury, does that injury put more pressure on Kelly Bryant to perform?
Absolutely. I think the expectations now are for Clemson to be the big dogs in the ACC. Kelly Bryant could have just aimed for second or third like everyone expected them to, but now that they're the top dogs and everyone's thinking they're going to be, I think it does put a lot more pressure on them.
I'm going to agree with you, absolutely, because, again, like you just mentioned, because Francois is out and FSU's kind of viewed as, almost taking a gap year right now. I mean, there's really not – I don't think anybody's giving them a chance anymore after Francois' injury.
Maybe not as much pressure because he is coming after – for a couple years, so he was supposed to be lesser already. And
Lamar is the reigning Heisman Trophy winner, but I do think that a lot of people in the ACC are looking now to Louisville and Clemson, and especially to a young guy like Kelly Bryant, to galvanize the team around him and take Clemson deep into the playoffs. So I would have to agree with you there. Next question: who gets fired first, Tom Herman or Kevin Sumlin?
How do you even pose a question like this? It's Kevin Sumlin, without a doubt. Herman's in his first year. You can throw the flag whatever you want.
I got to throw the flag.
Herman is in his first year. I know Texas is a big-time program with a lot of pressure, like Notre Dame. They're trying to run coaches out that don't win immediately. Someone's going to lose his job by the end of the year, though. I mean, at this point, if they would have beaten UCLA, it might change my opinion.
Tom Herman might be done before October. I mean, he lost to Maryland in his debut.
But he did not lose to Liberty. At least he's not Matt Rule at Baylor.
Right, but if someone is still at A&M, that makes me think that it's kind of like a Brian Kelly situation in Notre Dame. They're just going to ride out the storm. There has never been any indication to me about Texas being out the storm. They're somebody who's job done. Losing to Maryland, giving up 51 points. It was the most points Maryland had ever scored against a ranked opponent. Texas was ranked 23rd, I believe.
The most Texas has ever given up in an opener.
Yeah, I mean, you could argue that, they scored, I think, 41 points or something. 51.
Yeah.
No,
Texas
scored 41. So their offense works, but defensively they're a mess. So I just don't think Herman is going to last there very long. I think he's replaced by the end of the season.
Who are you going to replace him with? That's the question, though.
Who has Texas had the last couple of years that's been a decent coach since Mack Brown?
We'll see.
Third question. Who is the Heisman front-runner after week 1?
Still going to go Mason Rudolph. He was my guy from the very beginning. Just an impressive performance all around. I believe they played Tulsa. Oklahoma State did. They had 59 points. I think he had like over 40 yards. I think if they keep winning, I'm sticking with Mason Rudolph, the quarterback.
I'm not necessarily going to throw the flag on this one. I feel like this is more of an open-ended question. I mean, I feel like, somebody like Darnold or, I know Lamar didn't have a great performance against Purdue.
They had a pretty good performance. They just didn't win as much as they should have.
And I know that Darnold didn't throw any touchdowns, but at the end of the day, you won your opener. It's not going to hurt your stock. Losing a game certainly hurts your stock.
And almost losing a game could.
But it's still wide open enough. We're so early in the season that it's really hard to
Still a quarterback award in my mind.
Yes, for sure. Fourth question, is Michigan too young to win the Big Ten? Can they handle the pressure of playing in arguably the deepest and best conference in college football?
I've never really been high on Michigan. The quarterback situation scares me a little bit. Spate was really shaky. And, Harbaugh's usually good at getting quarterbacks ready to go week in and week out. At this point, I think losing all those players last year is really going to hurt them. Florida was a banged-up team, already not that good of a team to begin with. So I'm not going to change my opinion on Michigan, but they are on the rise. So they could prove me wrong.
All right, final question, perhaps the toughest one that you will face all year. Who will win the SEC East?
I don't think it's going to be that tough. I had Georgia from the very beginning. I'm sticking with the Dogs. A big test this week against Notre Dame, but with Florida struggling, Tennessee probably not looking like the team that everyone thought they would be. I'm going to stick with Georgia. I think it's a pretty clear-cut SEC East right now.
I think that's fair. I will throw the flag because I know that I picked.
Is that the team you have pulled up?
The Gamecocks. I picked them last week on Saturday. Here's the thing.
I hope you like getting proved wrong.
Looking at their schedule, they're playing Kentucky, Arkansas, Vanderbilt, those kinds of games.
At Georgia.
They are playing at Georgia on November 4th, and that is a critical game. But all of a sudden, the away game at A&M and the away game at Tennessee don't look that much. If you pull up Georgia's, they have to play Florida at Auburn, and they're playing nobody else that's really that good. So neither team's playing a team that's really difficult from the West. So I
just think
understand
you go with the
where you're
better
coming
team.
from with Georgia,
Yeah.
but if I had to pick one, a dark horse, it pains me to do it.
I don't understand.
It's
but
probably thundering and lightning outside, but I'm going to go with the Gamecocks. So now we will go ahead and wrap up the show, look at Week 2 preview, some big games that we have highlighted.
So we'll start out Stanford USC going out west. Pretty great Pac-12 matchup to begin the season. They usually wait a little bit. You had the USC-Washington game kind of later on last year, but Week 2 matchup, Stanford on the rise. USC kind of struggled Week 1. You know, what do you keep that you're looking
for Darnold to throw some touchdowns? That's, you know, if USC's offense is clicking, I don't think Stanford really has a chance to stay in this game. It might be close at the half, but is this going to be a night game? Has that already been determined?
I think all these. It's funny because all of these games, I believe, outside of the Penn State-Pittsburgh game, are all happening at the exact same time.
Oh, wow.
So if you're watching at home,
channel
get the
surfing.
split screen. Yeah, it'll be great.
I mean, again, Darnold just needs to throw some touchdowns. He can spread the ball around. He can throw to a bunch of guys, but you can't rely on the running game forever. You have to be able to put the ball in the end zone.
The defense just scares me for USC. I mean, they struggled against Western Michigan. Stanford can hold the ball really well, and they eat up time of possession.
Yeah, they do eat up time of
possession. They beat USC 27-10 last year. Arguably, that was without Sam Darnold under center. But I'm just really worried about USC's defense. I think Stanford's going to ground and pound the entire USC. I think it'll be the exact same this year. I'm going to.
Oh, wow. That's
Upset
a bit of an upset pick. Yeah. Next game that we'll get into looking at, OSU, Oklahoma. You know the Boomer Sooners want revenge after last year.
And in Ohio State's stadium. I mean, it's the exact opposite this year. It's going to be a tough game going on the road. I originally actually had Ohio State last week, and then looking at it more, I'm going to go with Oklahoma, actually. Watching Ohio State play Indiana, I think the first half of the game really said a lot.
Yeah.
That Oklahoma, if they're able to sustain a great offense throughout the entire game, can really compete with Ohio State. I don't think JT Barrett's going to be able to be up to the challenge.
I would agree with you. If it was a game at Oklahoma, I would pick the Sooners. I think Baker Mayfield at home would he would light up the scoreboard, but I feel like it's just too safe of a bet to not go with Ohio State.
Yeah.
And so I'm gonna pick the Buckeyes. I think at home they'll get it done, but I think that it could be a game that could possibly get to overtime.
It really could, and this is going to be a big test for Lincoln Riley. Game at Oklahoma, going into a pretty hostile environment.
If he's able to take away, get a win in that kind of environment, then that really should set them up for the rest of the season with their conference
would be
play.
huge for the Big 12.
Yes,
absolutely,
for sure. I mean, because that's one of the marquee teams in the Big Ten.
Yeah, and that's what held him back last year, losing to Ohio State.
Yeah.
When we move on to the third game, we got Georgia Notre Dame. Notre Dame creeping up. I believe they were ranked now.
Oh, no way! I gotta look
think
this up.
they're 25th. I saw that today, and it was an eye opener for sure. Georgia coming in, they won their first game against Appalachian State, which was kind of a stingy game. Yeah, you see that at the bottom. Notre Dame
ranked. They're 24th
in the country. Yes.
I don't know how I feel about that.
It makes it a ranked unranked matchup, so it looks a little bit better on paper. I'm going to go with Georgia in this. I know I believe it's at Notre Dame.
Yeah.
This game is.
I believe it is too.
So that'll be tough, but I think the defense for Notre Dame.
It's an evening game. Of course, it's the Notre Dame Network.
The Notre Dame Network.
Night game at Notre Dame, but I'm going to go with the Dogs too. I mean, they played well against App State, but I don't know why Notre Dame is ranked.
They blew out Temple. Temple is without their. I believe who was it? Matt Rule, I think, came from Temple to go to Baylor.
Not any. I mean, it doesn't give them validation to be ranked in the top 25.
Jacob Eason's out at quarterback for Georgia, but Fromm, the backup, outstanding performance against App State. I mean, even kind of like Virginia Tech, may even been better than the quarterback they would have had. So I think Georgia gets it done.
Yeah, I'm going with the Bulldogs for sure on that one. Fourth game that we're going to look at is Penn State Pitt. Pretty bit of a heated rivalry,
especially after last year when Pittsburgh.
Yeah.
But it's
Doing
totally
that to a
different.
couple teams almost.
Speaking of that, yeah, totally different Pittsburgh team though. They've lost a lot. They lost their offensive coordinator, which generated that win last year. Penn State's just going to be too much. McSorley's going to have a field day. Pittsburgh's banged up in the secondary, and the secondary is already bad as it is. So Penn State, I think they win by at least 3 touchdowns.
I picked Penn State too. I'm really high on them. I think Franklin will have them prepared. I don't see this being a close game. I think Penn State's going to win by at least 3 touchdowns, and I think it's going to be a pretty easy win for the Nittany Lions. Finally, last game that we're going to look at to wrap up the show, the big game of the week for us, Clemson hosting Auburn.
The Tigers will win.
I see what you did there.
But
playing
the
a little bit neutral.
higher-ranked Tigers will win.
Okay.
No bias here at all. Clemson's just the better team. What was it? Jared Stidham for Auburn. First game, a little bit shaky, 14 for 24. Did have a couple touchdowns, did have a pick.
Yeah.
Auburn really, they love to run it, and they've been doing that for years and years. Good. And I think I was really happy with Kelly Bryant's performance. I think it's going to be enough. It's going to be a ground and pound game back and forth, but I think in the end, Clemson gets the job done and Dabo gets a win.
I think that it's going to be more of a defensive struggle than a lot of people are anticipating. I think Clemson's defense at home will create stops, create a few turnovers, but I also think that Auburn will play well defensively on the road. I think Kelly Bryant may get caught up in the moment a little bit too much, like we saw how Taj Boyd would when he started, back in a few years back. Like his first few games when he played a big game against Georgia, he did play well, but it took him a while to get settled in. Mm-hmm. And I'm not saying that Kelly's not confident. I'm just saying that that's something I could see happening in his second start, night game, Death Valley. Huge
Bunch
implications.
There.
It's an easy home. So I feel like this is going to be touchdowns wins this one.
Auburn can be intimidated. I mean, they almost knocked off Clemson in the first game last year.
Yeah.
I'm sure Gus Malzahn showed that game
and it was a low-scoring affair.
Low-scoring game. I will say, though, for Auburn, Cameron Petway, their running back, is back, and with all the rushing yards they had last week, that's only going to help them. But I just still think it's not going to be enough. I think we saw it was Kent State, but Clemson's defense is just for real against the run.
Yeah.
And if you try and run, it's probably not going to work out. You got to go after the secondary, and Auburn doesn't do that as well.